Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Development Insights podcast, where we bring you ideas, experiences, and best practices from the real estate development industry. My name is Payam Nur Salehi, and I'm your host here. My guest for this episode is Jack Keays. Jack is a very good friend. We've worked together for 8 years now. He owns and he's a principal at Vortex Fire, which is a code consulting firm in the city of Toronto. And he's been busy quite a bit. He's been around the world. He explains where his path, how his path has been and how he got to where he is right now. But in a nutshell, he has worked in Canada, Singapore, Middle East, North Africa, and he has been involved in some of the many iconic projects that you might know just by him explaining from all over the globe. And he has a ton of experience when it comes to life safety and code consulting in Canada, as he refers to it. One of the reasons we wanted to record this episode with Jack is that he has been very much involved and at the forefront of the changes that have happened to our building code in the past few years and are going to happen to our building code in the next little while. As you might know, January 1st, 2025 is a milestone for a new set of changes that are coming to the building code. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time exploring the shortcomings and also opportunities that these building code changes are going to create for the development industry. We talk about the role of a code consultant in a development project. It definitely has changed between the time I started and in this business, and now they play a very different role these days, the code consultants. We talk about the alternative solution path, which is an interesting tool for anyone who is interested in pushing the envelope and exploring the limits of what can be done in a new project, in a new development project, a new building type. It's really informative listening to Jack on this. And also, we talk about the mass timber changes and how and what to expect, what's coming up, the singular staircase, potential changes that might be in the cards that are coming up, and a whole bunch of other things. Again, Jack is very knowledgeable. He's very relevant. His knowledge is very relevant and up to date. He's always at the forefront of these changes. As always, you can find all the information about this episode on our website, realestatedevelopmentinsights.com, realestatedevelopmentinsights.com. That's all one phrase. And I hope you learn a lot and enjoy listening to this podcast episode. Please remember to subscribe to the show. Thank you for your support. Hi, Jack. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to do this. I know it's been a while. We've tried to set this up, and I appreciate you sticking with it. We made it happen.
We've made it happen. And I have a voice this week, so it helps.
Yeah, that's definitely a good thing for this show. Thank you for being here. You are our code consultant. You and I have worked together for a number of years. And I want to turn the microphone to you and ask you to introduce yourself to our audience. Give us a little background. Who's Jack Keays? What's Vortex doing? And let's go from there.
Okay, so I'm Jack Keays. I'm the owner and principal of Vortex Fire Consulting in Canada. To go back, I feel like I spent most of my life getting ready for my job. I grew up in Ireland working in construction. As soon as I was tall enough to be considered 16 years of age, I was on a construction site. I was 14 at the time. And started working with tilers and that, and then gradually migrated my way up to actually doing construction studies in high school in Ireland, which is, I don't know if it's the same here in Canada, but actual proper construction studies. And went through university and ended up back doing a master's degree in fire safety engineering. So that's what got me into what is in Canada referred to as building code consulting.
Right.
So that would be like actually hands-on construction. I have a lot of experience back in those days of like working with carpenters, working with framers. So I often can talk the talk with people on how they're actually doing stuff. Does really help me in my profession to have so much like experience on the ground or even pouring concrete. You know, I grew up on a farm where we would pour all our own concrete, build all our own tanks, build all our own sheds. No contractors involved.
It's a good thing I wasn't there.
Yeah, like doing your own rebar, all your own stuff first. So that's just the way it is in those areas. There aren't that many
You
contractors
got the
around.
best form of education then.
Just like go out and tie the rebar yourself. So
Yeah.
so that's my background there. After finishing university, I moved to the Middle East. Actually, I moved to Dubai and Abu Dhabi for 5 years. So I spent 5 years there working on actually very, very large buildings. I feel like my career was backwards in that front. I'd never worked on an existing building until I came to Canada, and which is I'd worked on a 110-story building. I'd worked on all
Wow.
these crazy things, and some big tunnel networks in Abu Dhabi and different places. And then came to Canada, and I got introduced to Part 11 of the building code, and scratched my head pretty hard for the first while. And obviously, I'm pretty deep into it now. So I moved to Canada in 2010 for 1 year. And I think it's 14 years later now. So I live here now, married and 2 kids. So I own an engineering business. So the Canadian dream.
Good to have you here. Good to have you here.
Yeah, the Canadian dream, I suppose. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
That's my story in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So you got the best form of education. You went literally to the ditches and you worked there. And that's good. I want to start our conversation. Obviously, our audience, a lot of them are developers and professionals in the industry. Some of them are newer developers. And I think it's worthwhile for us to spending a few minutes and a little bit of time on discussing the role of a code consultant. And I'm going to put this into context, at least from my perspective, having worked in the industry for a while, is that at some point in time, code, I don't know if stagnant is the right word to use, but for a long time, the code was so static, I guess, that a lot of architects and engineers and everyone was pretty confident, and we would work. And at some point in time, basically, can we just bring a code consultant to double check a few things and go through there? And I think that has changed over the past few years. And I would assume that has changed how you perceive your role in the development process for a project. And why don't we start from there?
Yeah, I'd 100% agree on that. There's we were doing a presentation. We were doing a presentation one day for a client on mass timber, and we put up without kind of thinking about it, put up a graph of how the change of height of timber, height of buildings could be in timber between 1944 and today. So between 1944 and I believe 1995, there was pretty much 1 story in change in 50 years. And then from 95 to kind of 6 or 7 years ago, we got 2 more stories, pretty much nothing either. And then suddenly the curve goes like this, and it goes not quite vertical, but getting pretty close to it. So when I came to Canada originally in 2010, so we're using the time that 2006 Ontario Building Code, limit was 4 stories in timber. For example, and not talking about modular, bigger building, talking about what could we do on this site and what can we do? Can we fit? Is this within the height and areas allowed? What if we know it's already not? What are we doing for alternative solutions? Who are we going to talk to? Who are we going to get some early buy-in from? How are we going to do those? And getting some very early work in on those. There's obviously the traditional side of it where you as you mentioned, checking, plan checking, that type of stuff. But there's still the very upfront, hey, what are we thinking about here? Also for pricing, some preliminary pricing. What's it going to cost us if we do want to go with a certain type of building on this site? What's that going to look like? What measures are we going to need to include that we wouldn't normally include in, say, a conventional, maybe steel or concrete building?
Right. And I would agree with you because I think now they say when change happens, it brings opportunity with it. And right now, like you mentioned, the past 6-7 years, the code has changed, and and with every single change that has been happening, new opportunities are coming to the forefront. Which, like you mentioned, I'm seeing it that on different projects, code consultants are probably one of the first few people that now we're talking to and saying, do you think the code is going to allow us to that? And on that note, I want to also segue into what is known as alternate solution. and the role of an alternate solution. So I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, maybe first of all, explain to us what is an alternate solution? How does the process work, and how could a potential developer utilize that?
So how I describe it is essentially the building code is designed for rectangles and squares. Okay.
Right.
Okay, it's designed for very basic shapes. It's designed for what we've built already. It's not for the most part, it's not an innovative code. It doesn't force the industry. It just kind of regulates after the fact, like a lot of regulate. It regulates what we've done already. So within that, there's no real way to have a crystal ball and look forward and say, hey, what is the industry going to want in 5 years, in 10 years? Because the people writing the code typically aren't the innovators. Like they're not the architects, they're not the developers, they're not the people who are like, looking, dreaming big on this. So with that, essentially what the alternative solution process is you have a set of prescriptive requirements in the building code, and that will let you build pretty much 90% of what we want to build in the country on any given year. So for every, small 3 or 4 story office building, even a 100 story residential tower, you could do that entire building without an alternative solution, because it's all very codified. However, if you want to do something unusual, something different, or something that has a new system, a lot of it's about systems actually, but not so much like new design, it's new systems. The code said, hey, we can't, crystal ball this. So how about we just come up with a framework that allows you to do an alternative solution that will essentially show, and you to be able to demonstrate that you meet the same level of performance as a prescriptive requirement. It's kind of interesting. It's not a performance-based code, because performance-based code would have certain metrics you have to hit. You only have to show, or you have to show it's as safe as a other type of building in the building code. So that's the level of performance, and it does allow you a lot of freedom in terms of trying to use new systems, new designs, things like that. So that's and it allows the design team to come up with an approach that can meet the level of performance of the building code.
So yes, is it fair to assume a new development who wants to be innovative and want to bring something new to the table could and should perhaps count as an alternative solution, as a tool in the toolbox to get a better project done? Is that a fair way of describing it?
Yeah, it is. And you've got if you see someone might say, for example, hey, we've seen this very innovative system in Europe for some type of structural design or some type of typically hybrids. And we'd say, yeah, no problem. It's not currently covered in the say, for example, the Ontario Building Code. However, we know we can show it the same level of performance. Let's do it as an alternative solution. And then you have to document how that all works, and how document your justifications, and essentially the engineering analysis to support it.
So is it also fair to say an alternate solution is a bridge between what currently exists and the dream of what we want to get it to become reality?
And it's kind of like think of it like, I suppose, like a mill in some ways. Like there's stuff going out the back of like what we're finishing, and a lot of the stuff we finish gets picked up by the people who write the building code and say, hey, we should actually codify this, and it becomes as of right. So there's things that say there's designs that 5 years ago we were doing alternative solutions for. We're not doing them anymore. They're now in the building code. And like people turn to me, oh, is that going to take away a whole bunch of your work? And I'm like, no, we're doing a whole bunch of new stuff. That's old news. We've moved on from there. So like tons of stuff that there's tons of alternative solutions that we don't do anymore. They're no longer, they're now in the code. You can just do them as of right.
It's a evolutionary process, and that's another step in the process, which is good.
And that's what I mentioned about the code is like, it doesn't look forward, it typically looks back. So it takes, hey, people have built, there's been 100 of these buildings built in the last 2 years. We should put this in the code, and they put it in the code. Essentially, that's what happens.
Right. And we're going to dive a little bit, actually more than a little bit, into the changes that are upcoming changes in the building code a little bit into our discussion. But before going there, I want to re-emphasize this topic that, and again, I'm re-emphasizing it for myself here, that the traditional view was, code consulting and code effect on the building is something you just have to deal with. Whereas I would say today, it's okay, the code changes and the code effects and the alternate solution routes provide you with opportunities of doing things in the buildings that maybe 10 years ago no one was even thinking about.
Yeah.
And it's my way of encouraging people to think about that code a little bit heavier in the role that it plays in the development project. So with that being said, I want to go and talk about a few of those major changes. Like you said, let's look backward a little bit. Let's say like some what have been some of the major changes in the past 3 or 4 years or 5 years that you think have really helped shape the industry for the better. And then we're going to transition into a conversation about the future changes.
So the changes we've seen, I suppose the biggest one is the increase in height in timber construction, in mass timber construction. That's been the one that's had the biggest effect in terms of actual buildings getting built with a material that we simply weren't using 10 years ago.
Right.
So basically what in terms of a history lesson, they brought in the 1944 building code, and that's what stopped all the heavy timber construction above 4 stories. It's why when you drive around Toronto and you have those old buildings on Spadina and places that are 6, 7, 8 stories at times in timber that were built nearly 100 years ago now. They just stopped. So now the code allows them again, and we're getting essentially what's old is new. That's been the biggest probably change we've seen. Also, just in terms of like just the types of construction we're doing, we're doing more panelized construction than we've probably ever seen before. It's just becoming so popular. Also we've delivered, 50 or 60 modular buildings in the last few years. Everyone's been different. Everyone's seen a new system. It's all different, different technologies, similar technologies, slightly different applications. So that's been the modular space. But one of the challenges with modular is we're trying to shoehorn modular into conventional codes. So there's been a bit of work with that. That's actually getting sorted out now, a lot of it. So it's getting easier and easier to do modular. But yeah, a lot of and it's panelized timber, modular stuff has really changed things.
Yeah, that has had an effect on the material and the green building and making buildings more sustainable. That has definitely made some changes there. Just before we move on, what changed? What do you think happened that allowed all of a sudden mass timber to be safe? Because a lot of people, when you have a lot of discussion, especially people who are not from the industry, you discuss, and everyone there's a feeling that it's wood, it's going to burn, there's going to chance of fire, and there's a hazard. And why did it all of a sudden change?
So you have to look at why. Go back a step. Why was it originally limited? Okay, and the reasons for the original limitations were on things as simple as just prevalence of sprinklers. When they originally stopped these requirements in the 1940s, they didn't have the sprinkler systems we had today. They just didn't sprinkler buildings, or to the extent, or didn't have the reliability. They didn't have the same fire alarm systems we have. They didn't have the same firefighting operations we have now. Just in terms of quality of materials, in terms of construction approaches, and the different checks and balances that happen along the way with permitting, inspections, and that. It's a very different landscape now in terms of reliability. So all these, as the codes changed and the document, the building code went from being, a small, probably half-inch thick document to 2 full binders now. And as it progressed, all these additional measures came in. The technology got better, and everything gets better. Every single version of the, even the fire alarm standard or whatever, it all gets better every time. Everything continuously gets better. So all these things happen, and then we're like, hey, should we go back and look at the height and area requirements? What was the original reason they were limited? And a lot of it was down. That was one way of limiting fire between buildings, or keeping occupants safe. So it was a big re-examination of that. And then also going ahead and testing these under real conditions, saying, hey, if we do have a fire compartment fire of this size, what happens? How much of the timber gets involved? Is it actually worse, or how does it compare to, so if you take a concrete building, you're allowed to line the interior of a concrete building with timber. How would they compare to each other in a fire condition? And hey, in the early stages, they're very, very similar. So that's been some of the work that's happened, and that's been used to support the code changes. And the code is a balance. You have to look at the code as a balance. Fire and life safety is one part of it, but it has to balance out the the economics part of it. It has to balance out the sustainability part. It's a whole balancing act trying to get the code to work. You can't just focus on one area, and say, hey, we're just going to focus on fire and life safety. We just live in, I don't know, we wouldn't live in buildings then. So there's a lot of balance that has to happen there, and it is a challenge at the regulation level to try and meet all the different competing agendas from different groups to deliver a building code.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that the wood is the wood? Maybe it got 10% better or a few percent better in terms of the material, but now the environment that we have, the built environment, the built system that we have, is more accepting or more supportive of this material. Now we can utilize it. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
The amount, the change in firefighting, active firefighting, has been very significant, very, very significant in that time frame. And just how we approach buildings and that, it's really changed the firefighting capabilities. So they're all adding up to allow us to use more materials like timber and other, mainly timber when I say combustible materials.
Right. So for those listeners who are thinking about living in a mass timber building, they should feel more comfortable that they have a better system in place. And so now let's change gears a little bit and let's start looking forward. We all know that there are some decent changes coming in 2025, and there are discussions about the effects that these changes are going to have on the performa, the constructability of the projects, and I don't know, maybe walk us through the top 3 to 5 major changes that we should anticipate from a perspective of a developer or a builder of a project.
So the new code, there's the background to this is all the provinces in Canada have agreed to essentially harmonize their codes as much as possible and have as little variation as possible. So hopefully that's a good thing. We'll see how it all works out. So they go ahead and they changed the Ontario Building Code to match up with the National Building Code. And I think there's 2,400 odd changes made in this current version. A lot of them are very, very minor. Okay, a door size shifts from 860 clear width to 850 clear width. It actually gets smaller for accessibility. There's other parts that have come up. There's other parts that have gone down. But then there are some big changes. And one of the big changes from a developer perspective is actually facades. There's a new requirement there's a new permission in Ontario that you can now go to any height with a combustible facade, provide passes the appropriate testing. That previously wasn't the case. Once you went over 6 stories, previously it was pretty much non-combustible. So that's one big change that we've seen here. So that could be interesting how that plays out in the residential market, especially where there's probably more punched window approaches than glass facade. So we'll see how that goes. It'll definitely, I know when the news came out, a lot of the facade suppliers were pretty happy because their product suddenly became much more, bigger, and big buildings, very big buildings can use it. So that's a big one. That's on that side. Then there's other minor changes as well. We'll talk about keep on the major changes. The other one that is the gradual increase in the height of timber construction. We currently have 12 stories in the building code. We anticipate the Ontario Building Code will bring in the 18 stories by the end of the year. That is the what we think is happening anyway.
So a 50% increase in height from 12 to 18.
Yeah. Also, what we're watching out for, and this is working backwards, I mentioned, it looks like the Ontario Building Code is going to also change the amount of exposed timber that's allowed. So we're going to get an increase in exposed timber. This has a big cost knock-on effects because it means we need less drywall. We can expose more, even if we don't want to. It's our choice now what we do. And that can have a big effect. Like we with all these timber buildings trying to make them more economically, the numbers have to work. We're working for private developers. Our numbers have to work. So that's one of the big things we're seeing that as being quite positive. So there's been kind of refinement of the 12-story. We're looking at 18-story. There's also these changes happening in BC, which we're not sure when they're going to come to Ontario, and that's about even more exposed timber, up to 8 stories, 100% exposed. So that's an area where we think we're going to see some changes as well. But yeah, there's a lot coming in the new code in January, and we'll see. It'll take a small bit of time for everything to bed in, but yeah, there's a lot of opportunity coming our way.
That's pretty good. What about use of the scissor stairs and having to have 2 separate exits and stairs? That has been one of the challenges making the smaller projects viable and making the numbers work, like you mentioned, on smaller, especially mid-rise projects. Is there any discussion about that being changed anytime soon?
So it's a very hot topic. I can tell you, there's very conflicting opinions, but in April this year, I was in Copenhagen for the Society of Fire Protection Engineers. So it's an international organization, and their annual performance-based conference was in Copenhagen. And we had one delegate from Canada, we had one from the UK, some Europeans, and I believe someone from either Australia or New Zealand on the panel as well. And it was very interesting to hear the different heights to which people were talking about these single exit buildings. The kind of Canadian delegation got a bit of hassle over their what they were presenting, and then they realized we're currently limited to 2 stories, and they're like, "Oh no, this isn't even a discussion." So we go into high-rise buildings, whether you need two only comes in above 7 stories in most countries, in Europe anyway, and in other parts of I think Australia, New Zealand as well. So a lot of it's down to societal risk, okay? And in Canada, we've one of the lowest building codes in the world for the height of stairwells. It goes back a long way. And that's one of the challenges you're going to have is, why was it put there in the first place? Is there a valid reason? Was it just the best available tool that was around? Have things changed a lot? But yeah, there is a lot of work happening in the single stairwell. BC are the first ones leading that out. They went out for a very, in our world, a very fast consultation. It was like less than a year between them looking into it and it being in the code. I haven't seen all the nuts and bolts of it yet, but it is coming into their code. They've announced it's coming in. We are hearing just like there might be some changes in Ontario, but lower. I don't think probably 4 stories would be more realistic right now.
Just to be clear, what that would mean is that potentially in 2025, you can build a 4-story building and have a single staircase. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, but you have to remember it's a fairly small footprint. So
right.
Now it does have a great application, say, in cities, okay? Because if you think of some of the small sites we see in say, for example, in Toronto, I used to live on St. Clair West Avenue. I'd walk down the street, I'd see a building that you couldn't possibly put anything really feasible on it, as just on its own, unless you bunched them all together. Those types of buildings where you're getting infills, this could be really effective for infills of lots. You can put 4 units per floor is what's anticipated. You'll have a really tight core in this in terms of you have a elevator stairway. Hopefully you're not losing as much space to corridors and stairwells, and hopefully you can make it should make it work a bit better. So you take that, which is the stairwell issue, you marry that up with our other types of panelization. Typically in those buildings, modular is probably not the best one for that, but take panelization for that. You're starting to get into getting a really nice building. Take, for example, if we took it in CLT, we do infill panels. We build it pretty clean build, and we get a really tight. It's a small building, but it's really effective, hopefully, for construction. We've done a few tilt ups in the city because of the 0-meter lot line issues, where we've no access to the adjacent buildings. They presented challenges. We've figured those out. So hopefully that'll be more, once we add the single stairwell part of it in, it'll make it even more big guns going at that size of building. But I think for I think even people who own property in the city, it would make it more easier for them to actually develop out their own piece of land without selling it.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. That's a big part of our city right now that has the fabric and the character, and not necessarily open to having a 10-story building being built in that neighborhood. So going from a 2-story building even to a 6-story building, or 4 or 5, for that matter, could make a significant difference in the new blood that coming there, and also helping the whole housing crisis that we're dealing with right now. So
Absolutely.
That's a good one.
And especially if you're living within, like I'm certainly not the planner or the zoner in this, but it's if you're able to live within the zoning or planning or the avenue plans and stuff, it makes it, makes the whole, you're not hanging on to the building for 10 years trying to get it rezoned or onto the land. So yeah, it does make it hopefully easier.
Right. And I think it goes back to what we discussed earlier about the evolutionary nature of this process. Yeah, you're right. The technology is getting better. The environment is getting more ripe, and multiple things are coming together that would potentially allow that type of project to actually become viable. Because I know from experience that it's really, really hard to make those projects work between the staircases, between the entrances and exits and type G requirements. And thank God we don't need to deal with the parkings as much as we used to. And that was a good win. So I want to switch gear from that and go back to just one more thing about the whole mass timber and fire rating before we move on. I've heard you talk about insurance, and I know insurance dealing with mass timber building, it's a question mark. And I think the question mark, part of it has to do with the fact that the insurance companies haven't had enough exposure or too much exposure to that type of product. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on the role of code, insurance, mass timber, fire ratings.
Yeah. So there's been a bunch of work done in the last like 2 or 3 years to actually help out with the insurance side of it, and the work has been around actually testing exposed timber like in a construction fire situation. So one of the things you'll notice with a mass timber building is the building's actually usually really clean during construction.
True.
There's no cutting on. There are very limited cutting on site. If there's cutting on site, it's a mistake. Typically, it's after happening with something. So if you went, like for example, when I went on site at T3 Bayside, an 11-story building, there's not when the superstructure is going up, there's actually not a lot of people on site. The crew were in doing their work. It's going up. You're like, wow, this place is really clean. There's no garbage cans and all that. Or when there was funding a few years ago to actually test, hey, what would happen if we set a garbage bin on fire in a mass timber building? So they did a whole bunch of testing in Ottawa, more in Vancouver, where they actually tried to simulate fires to actually catch the structure on fire is quite difficult. Timber, this size of timber doesn't really lend itself in the early stages depending on what size of fire you put up against it. It's actually hard enough to ignite it. And even when it does, it tends to burn out as opposed to go into a full flashover big fire. So that's been one of the good things. That's been trying to drive data back to the insurance industry on what actually is a realistic fire scenario in these, or what could we see, and just try to explain the difference between stick frame and mass timber. They're not the same thing. Just how they behave, how the fires behave is not the same thing. So that's been a bit of work that's going on. The Canadian Wood Council have done a lot of work on that. And then just fire safety during construction. Realistically, the less people you have on site, the less risk you have of fire. People are probably going to be the ones to start the fire, something they do. So that's one of the things you'll see. Like we did the fire safety plan for a few of the mass timber buildings in Toronto that we worked on, and they were far stricter than anything we were doing in concrete at the time. And the way they worked out, there's a lot of measures in place that will definitely reduce the risk or limit the risk of something actually happening. So we're seeing also, for course of construction fires, the National Fire Code has reduced some of the requirements or made it easier to do some of the requirements, because the way it was previously written, it was very prohibiting actual construction. That's something we'll see coming up now with the hopefully if it ever gets brought to Ontario in that format, the National Fire Code is making it easier, and hopefully the insurers will rely upon the fire code compliance as their way of mitigating the risk, and hopefully insure these properties a bit easier than they have been in the past.
Right. Okay. If you were given a magic wand, if you were all of a sudden given the powers of, I don't know, you take your pick, but the mayor, the premier, or the prime minister, or anyone in the industry who has power, and you could make a change to a law, a guideline, a regulation, a mindset, or a mental model, or anything that would help us design better buildings, make the whole process of buildings better, and improving buildings easier. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, make a performance-based provision in the building code. So you just take it completely from first principles, and there's no height restriction, there's no area restriction, because they really aren't linked to anything. Like 18 stories, realistically, what are you going to do with a fire truck from the ground floor anyway? So, at 18, you might as well be 28, you might be 42. There's no real basis for some of these height restrictions. So I'd like to see an option where you just go from a performance approach and say, this is, compare this to a concrete building. That's what we did with some of the old work with Sidewalk and these guys. What was the comparative of concrete building to what we were proposing? But I would see just a performance approach with no limitation on what we're asked to do in terms of height and area, but we're actually just shown this is the criteria you have to satisfy. If you can do this, the material doesn't matter. And that's what I'd like to see. That is what they have in some other parts of the world. And it would be, I believe there is talks of some of it getting looked at the national building code level. So I would really like to see that come to Ontario.
So performance-based code, basically.
An option for stick with, keep what we have. No problem. Keep that. That'll do 90% of what we want to do. But then we've got the other 10%, which we can have a real go at and be really innovative in that space. And it's not just fire. It could be energy. It could be whatever it is. Go beyond what the code actually has envisaged right now.
Okay.
That's probably actually I'll add to that. But insert a mechanism for reviews by a third-party review mechanism. Because if we take some of these buildings, especially if they're high on performance level, to an AHJ who doesn't have the resources, smaller AHJs and things like that, who might have only a few building engineers, they're going to really struggle to review some of these. When you think of the powerhouse teams that are put together to deliver some of these buildings, like you've been on some of your projects. Look at the years of experience you've got sitting there.
Yeah,
the building department. Yeah, they don't always have this amount of people, like especially once you go outside of the big municipalities. So I would like to see the ability of the AHJ to implement a third-party review system.
Yeah, and just for context, AHJ refers to authority having jurisdiction.
Correct, yeah, the city,
which essentially the municipality that's reviewing the drawings. Okay, that's I totally agree with you that opens up a whole bunch of room for innovation, and we definitely need more of that. I want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to kind of circle back to where we started about the role of a code consultant. And I want to say, let's talk to new developers or or people who are willing to change their approach to development. If I'm a developer and I want to start a brand new project, I want to come to Jack and his team and say, Jack, like I want to really utilize your expertise and your know-how of the code. And I've heard that things are changing. How should I approach you? What are the top questions I should be asking you or any other code consultant for that matter, saying, so I can utilize your expertise? Yeah,
so it'd be like, we kind of want to understand what you want out of it. Okay, so if you're saying, hey, we have a lot of our clients have, say, for example, a commitment to sustainability. They'll come, hey, we really want to do this in timber. It's part of our sustainable initiative. Well, like, okay, no problem. This is what you can show me approximately the size of your site, what you're planning to put on it within this height and area. This is what we can do as of right. This is what will be an alternative solution. This is kind of your risk profile. We might say, hey, we believe this code's going to change. If you're not applying until next year, you might be fine. You might not have a whole lot of extra to do. We might do an early adoption alternative, so which is more straightforward. So that's what we'd be working with them to see what their options are. And it's really we're totally at massing stage at that. And even with property owners, like we're talking to some property owners right now about even just spatial separation agreements that they need to put into pieces of land that they're selling. Mm-hmm. They have one tower where they're going to develop that tower where they're going to sell the piece of land next door. However, we need 2 meters of spatial separation distance off the other property. So we need to get that into it before they sell it. Things like that, and just future-proofing their own designs, I suppose, is what we're looking at as well. So, what can help us out here with how we're going to approach this, how we're going to lay it out on site, what makes it easier.
Yeah, so it helps to have you on board early on, just to have those discussions. Because I know traditionally, we would, like I said, we would call you in when we had 75% drawings done and just say, Jack, like, take a look at this and give us a code report.
That's the traditional, 75% drawing or 75% construction, and we're really we're really pushing back. So, you know what?
Yeah, I know. No, those days are gone.
Yeah, no, they really are. Like, we don't get too many SOSs these days. Most of the developers who work with are very, they're very tuned into what we do, so they see value in what we do. So yeah, that has definitely helped.
That's good. And in terms of colleagues, and it's a hard question. In terms of colleagues, designers, professionals, architects, engineers, like you mentioned, some of these meetings and some of these projects that you and I have worked together on, sometimes we have 20 people on these calls. And like with virtual calls has made it more easy to have more people on these calls. What do you think your colleagues should know and pay attention more when it comes to dealing with code and potentially opportunities and pitfalls when thinking about code?
I suppose it's interesting. You see different firms behave differently. To be like in some architectural stuff, and it is interesting. We see some people like being so innovative and so interested in learning about the code and what the opportunities are, and then there's other firms that are, I don't know if it's more risk averse or whatever. They're like, no, we'll just kind of stick with what we're doing for a while, and then we'll wait for everyone else to, and then we'll kind of do it, and things like that. But knowing what your options are, I think you have to, you let your client know and don't rule out certain things just yet. We hear in some markets, hey, the costing's too high, and I'm like, wow, sure, we're building a lot of these. I don't think my other clients are doing our spot, are losing money or putting money out of their own pocket into them. So no, it's knowing what the options are and using the options, and knowing also just how to navigate the building department. A lot of building departments, they really want to make housing happen. They're trying really hard, so they will talk to you early on, especially if you're doing below market. Various types of housing. So they will talk to you and they'll say, hey, what do you want to do? It's an alternative solution. Okay, we'll talk to you. We'll have at least some discussions with you. So knowing what the options are for getting some early discussions with the city, and knowing what the options are for your design based on what's either in the current code or what's coming in the next few years.
Right. Okay. That's good advice. And we did talk about the past. We talked about the changes in 2025. I know you don't have a magic ball there, but like if you were to, forecast or foresee the future and say, what do you think is going to be the next frontier for the code in the next 3 to 5 years, and potentially for people to try and, I want to try and see if there are innovations that you think are going to be able to find a way back into the code or find a more extensive role in the code and in the construction that we do.
I think the one in terms of, it might be like kind of sharpening up mass timber a small bit on the protective membranes. They're quite difficult at the moment. Like the BC code is a 3-layer gypsum board requirement on some types of buildings. That's very, very difficult. That's a very costly solution.
Right.
We are seeing some of our clients trying to get spray-on applications that come out of the factory, different coatings. I think that's going to be a big area on. It's kind of taking what's in the code right now, but really making it more usable. Because I think that's where we're going to see. If we want to, as designers and developers, if we want to get these buildings built, they have to be cost effective, and that's one of the things we want to see. That's on the timber stuff. Also think the single stairwell is going to come in. I think we're going to see smaller versions of it. I think it's graduate probably into 6-story versions. I'm not sure if Canada as a country is ready for high-rise single-story or single-exit buildings, like we've seen in some other parts of the world, but I think probably see a good few years of getting that 6-story nailed down. That's where I think I'll see the things happening in the next while. And just in terms of construction and availability of trades, I think it's still a big push towards panelization. I think is the one we're going to see the most.
Yeah, I would agree with that. In the degree of efficiency and automation that I've witnessed in some of these plants is actually fascinating. And if that were to come to mass scale on these prefabricated wall panels or solar panels, that could be really promising. So hopefully that's what we see. Couple of closing questions. What do you read regularly to keep yourself updated, and what would you suggest our audience read here to go to our website? Or I doubt that books are
for my life.
I never
stop reading. So
yeah, you and I both. Yeah,
I never stop reading. I'm reading a book right now by a friend of mine. He's a Torontonian. Your grass is greener. Okay. So I'm going to give him
an interesting title.
I'm going to give him a plug here. Jason Silver.
Yeah.
So I know Jason a long time. A fascinating book about just your own mindset within your own company, your own mind growth, and different things like that. And the first chapter's on communication, which I laughed at because I've definitely made a lot of those communication mistakes. So that's a good book that I'm reading right now. A lot of my stuff, I never stop reading at work anyway because I'm always reading the new codes. But a lot of my other stuff is on mindset. Tons of books out there, but I also own the company, so I have to run other parts of my hats I have to wear on a given day. But yeah, Your Grass is Greener is a good start.
That's a good book. And what about the code stuff? Like, what about technical? How do you keep updated? Is there any good reference that our audience can refer to?
Yeah, so obviously the best reference is we're putting on a code webinar on the code changes. We are very focusing it in on kind of the buildings we do. So that's one of the ones I'd like to keep an eye on our website, our LinkedIn for that. It'll probably actually so many code changes we're going to have to break it into a few sessions. So
I think you mentioned 2,400 changes. Yeah, that's a lot of changes.
Yeah, and I've talked to people already about how it's. I've tried to deliver it in 2 hours, and it's unbearable. Like it is.
It's too much.
It's too much. Now, there are a lot of changes, so we're going to break a few sessions. So keep an eye out on our social media for that. But we can. There are various guides. We've our own version of, a red line version of code built ourselves, so that we can quickly reference these things because they are there's a lot of moving parts, and managing that change ourselves isn't always as efficient as we want it to be. So yeah, So we keep up to date on stuff. We typically like to run our own webinars because that means we know it better than anyone else in the audience. Done all the work. I'm going to learn all the changes anyway. I might as well tell everyone about it. So right. That's what we've been doing. But yeah, keep an eye out for our webinar.
That's perfect. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I guess the last question would be, if you were to give advice to a younger generation of engineers, designers, architects, professionals who are coming into the mix and who might be interested in doing what you're doing right now, do you have any pointers? Do you have any directives? And say if they want to pursue a career in code or fire safety, maybe give them some pointers.
Yeah, we have we recently onboarded 4 different graduates. So we're definitely always hiring, but The big one we look for is honesty is construction experience. Honesty, it's construction experience. We want you to know how buildings go together. So often the engineers we hire come out of school. They have no particular practical experience, and some bit of it is actually super useful to understand. So we try and get them out on site as much as we can. And then there's we've got the different people who are very good at details on, drywall and different things. So we try to have some experience in construction. We're bring them into fire as opposed to fire the other way is hard. So I can teach you fire stuff. It's very hard to teach you about how buildings go together. So yeah.
That's good. Thank you very much. Is there any questions that I didn't ask you, or do you have any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Well, the other thing is we do look we continuously keep on top of it because other countries are moving ahead with other things. We want to know what they're thinking about, know what they're doing, because we bring it to push it here in Canada. It's something to know about. Like the US has gone pretty high on buildings as well, higher than we are. It's at 24 stories now. So we're watching what they're doing. A fire in Canada should be different to a fire in the US, so we're hoping there's logic there. There's a lot of work happening. I'd say tune up smaller buildings to try and make them easier. That's the other one, but yeah, nothing major else to ask about.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jack. I very much appreciate your time being here. This was very informative. And with all the changes that are coming to the code, who knows, maybe we do another episode in a year and you have another 2,400 changes for us to go through.
Hopefully not 2,400. Hopefully about 10 good ones. That's what I want.
10
I want 10 good changes.
10 good ones.
Not 2,400 small ones. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jack. And I
you.
appreciate your time. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Just one last thing before you leave. We've created a document called Real Estate Development Toolbox, which you can download for free from our website at realestatedevelopmentinsights.com. This document is basically the result of us asking our network and our listeners, what is a top tool that you use on a daily basis to keep yourself aware of information that's going on in the industry, the changes, the trends, the technologies, the regulations, and or if you with the tools that you use to make sure that you deliver quality results to your clients and customers, the tools that help you with productivity in what you do, and also any softwares, specialized softwares that you think are useful to share with others. So if you think there are resources that you're using on a daily basis and you would like others to know about them, please make sure to let us know, and we will make sure to include it in the next iteration of this toolbox. Thank you very much, and I hope you find this document useful.